Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute to allow some more people to join, but thanks so much for joining us today. We can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We're very happy to be here today presenting a timely panel entitled How the ABA is Serving Detained Immigrants During COVID-19 and How You Can Help, sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration, the Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities, and the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. This is one of many panels in a series sponsored by CRSJ on the COVID-19 pandemic. CRSJ is actively planning additional COVID-19 programming on a variety of issues, so please visit americanbar.org/CRSJ for updates. During today's program, if you have a question, we ask you to please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function to ask your question. If you don't see the controls currently, please ensure your screen is not on idle. We may address some questions in the chat box during the presentation, but we're also going to save some time at the end for questions. So if your question doesn't get answered during the presentation, we'll try to get to it at the end. We'll also be sharing a recording of this program to everyone who's registered so that you can share it widely in your networks. It's also being broadcast to YouTube, so you can have people search for it later there. My name is Jenny Needler. I'm a staff attorney with the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I encourage you to visit the Commission's website at americanbar.org/immigration to learn more about our efforts to ensure fair treatment and full due process rights for immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees within the United States. The Commission is unique among ABA entities because it operates 3 projects, including 2 direct service projects near the southern border with Mexico, the Immigration Justice Project in San Diego, and the South Texas Pro Bono Asylum Representation Project, or ProBAR, in Harlingen, Texas. We also have the Children's Immigration Law Academy in Houston, which serves as a legal resource center for advocates representing migrant children. Representatives from each of the 3 projects join us today to discuss their work, the challenges COVID-19 has presented for detained adult migrants and unaccompanied children, and how you can volunteer your time to help. Today's panelists are Ambreen Walji, the Pro Bono Coordinator and Staff Attorney for the ABA Immigration Justice Project, Priscilla Orta, Senior Staff Attorney for ProBAR, and Chloe Walker, Senior Staff Attorney for the Children's Immigration Law Academy, or CILA. We'll begin with Ambreen. Thank you again for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Jenny mentioned, I'm the Pro Bono Coordinator and Staff Attorney with the ABA Immigration Justice Project based in San Diego, California. We're a not-for-profit whose mission is to provide to promote due process and access to justice at all levels of the immigration and appellate court proceedings by providing pro bono legal services. I'm going to start my presentation by showing you all a video that captures our work during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Jesús es mi pastor, nada me faltará, solo por el amor que nos tiene y nos da. Padre nuestro que estás aquí en mi corazón, no te alejes jamás, aunque sea un pecador. creo en Jesucristo, porque Él siempre es bueno, por la fe que yo tengo, para subir al cielo, alabarás a Dios con todo el corazón. Dios quiere ser de mí, de todos pide amor. Yo creo en Jesucristo, porque Él siempre fue bueno, por la fe que yo tengo, para ir al cielo. Aleluya, 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 aleluya.
So as you can see from our video, we work primarily out of the Otay Mesa Detention Center. We're a staff of 12, including 8 attorneys and a DOJ accredited rep. But we are the organization with the largest presence at the Otay Mesa Detention Center because we facilitate, we run the legal orientation program and ZEP and ICE detention. So for those of you who don't know, ICE was created in 2004. It stands for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, and it was created to prevent acts of terrorism by targeting the people, money, and materials that support terrorist and criminal activities. The average population of people in immigration custody right now is as high as 60,000 people a day. And that includes asylum seekers who have requested protection at or near a US port of entry and are generally mandatorily detained and can't be released from detention until they pass a credible fear interview. We noticed, we learned that at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, so around May 1st, although the pandemic continues and who knows if we've really reached its peak, that ICE had tested 1,000 immigrants in its custody, and about 450 had tested positive for COVID-19, meaning that almost half of the people that they tested for the virus tested positive. In terms of who's detained at these detention facilities, there are people from all walks of life. There's no quintessential detainee. We largely see people of color who are natives of non-European countries. We see a lot of single males, Black and brown single males, but nearly every country from around the world is represented of various security classifications, all genders, all medical conditions ranging from healthy to terminally ill are at this detention center. What we know from being there is that we learn a lot more about the world and the plight of many people by being in the detention center that we wouldn't have learned otherwise because it's not reported in the media. And what we learn as well is that in entering the detention facility, a person's experience, if they weren't already isolated, making this trek across the world to try to seek refuge in the United States, they are extremely isolated when they end up in ICE detention. Before COVID-19, visitors were scarce for people in detention. People who had family members who were undocumented or spouses that were undocumented were not able to have their family members visit. And many of them fled their countries of origin, expecting very different realities than what they faced being locked in a jail 3 miles north of the border of Tijuana. So this is the Otay Mesa Detention Center. As I mentioned, it normally houses 1,000 ICE detainees, and it also houses a marshal population. So those are people who have been arrested for federal offenses, and it usually has around 500 people who are in marshal custody. And entering the facility, you're acutely aware that you are in a prison. You have to go through double barbed wire. You have to announce that you don't have any contraband, including cell phones, tobacco, any electronics. You're required to go through security. You take off your shoes, you walk through a metal detector, you have your bag scanned. There's no internet access whatsoever at the Otay Mesa Detention Center, and phone access is paid for by the detainee. Social distancing is impossible. This became extremely apparent during the last couple of months. The detainees sleep in bunk beds. They have communal living spaces. And although ICE operates 8 detention centers across the country, ICE also contracts with 7 private companies that run facilities across the country, and the Otay Mesa Detention Center is run by a private company, CiLA. Before COVID-19 hit, we heard complaints about the temperature of the facility being extremely cold, the food, the lack of control over scheduling of food. And while the facility has a nutritionist on staff, meals really didn't serve the needs of any population who had any existing health conditions. And so people with relatively minor health conditions, when entering the facility, end up having their conditions worsen. For example, high blood pressure, anemia, etc. But now it's become even worse. And I'll speak to that a little bit. Visitation with family, as I mentioned, was always a challenge, but now family visitation has been shut down since mid-March. In person, family visitation has been shut down since mid-March. And as you can imagine, it's now June. So if you were ever isolated, you're feeling isolated in your homes right now, imagine what it's like to be in a jail and to hope to see somebody familiar in a country that you're not familiar with. And this has been exacerbated by court delays that I'll also speak to, because often previously detainees would end up seeing their family at court, but now court is operating through BTC through video. The detained population in San Diego, like I mentioned, people from all over the world. The languages that we see very frequently are Spanish. We also see Russian, Pular, Arabic, and Creole. We see people who were formerly an NPP in the Migrant Protection Protocol and who are on appeal because they lost their case. We see people from all professional backgrounds from all over the world. And generally we see a high number of asylum seekers. And now what we're seeing is that an extremely high percentage of whom are COVID positive, who have been exposed to COVID or are exhibiting COVID-like symptoms. So I'll speak a little bit about COVID-19. So our first case of COVID-19 that we saw at the Otay Mesa Detention Center was actually that of an employee of CoreCivic, and that happened in mid-March. And we realized then that the facility was not providing protective equipment for its staff or encouraging social distancing. And that's really what led to the spread of the virus. Otay Mesa quickly became the facility with the worst, the ICE facility with the worst COVID-19 outbreak across the country. Right now, we're seeing ICE report that there's 162 people who have tested positive for COVID-19, but that number has been stagnant. So we suspect that they're underreporting, and we have suspected that for a long time. As the video captured, you can sense the despair that people feel when they're in that place, and the sense of relief and hope that they have when they're released. At the end of April, the ACLU filed a class action lawsuit to demand a reduction in the number of detainees at Otay Mesa and Imperial Regional Detention Facility, which is a nearby facility, during the COVID-19 pandemic. The lawsuit also sought an emergency restraining order calling for the immediate release of people over the age of 45 and people who had underlying medical conditions or were at a serious illness or underlying medical conditions that placed them at serious risk of death due to COVID-19. And at first, ICE reported that there were only 8 people who met that definition. And then days later, they identified 51 to 69 people who met this definition. And on April 30th, Judge Shabrab of Central District ordered the release of the medically vulnerable people identified by the ACLU or who met this definition. As a result, about 90 people who were identified were released. Not all who were COVID positive or who had health issues were released. So we saw that people with criminal convictions, even those that were super dated from the 1980s and who had serious health issues such as hypertension, asthma, are still in detention, and they remain in detention as the virus continues to spread. So in fact, the people that are left behind are almost worse off because they missed their ticket out and they're conscious of that, or they feel that way. On May 6th, 2020, the first death in ICE detention nationwide from COVID-19 occurred at the Otay Mesa Detention Center. And it was that of Carlos Escobar Mejia, who was hospitalized after exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms. As I mentioned, we suspect that the COVID-19 positive rates are being underreported because detainees tell us that they are not being tested. And we also know that there's significant spread among the Marshall population at the facility. And they weren't successful in the ACLU wasn't successful in their suit to have those people who were medically released on TRO. We know that the spread has occurred because of the efficiencies of the facility to take precautions. So one attorney who has a client who's sick and who has a cellmate who's tested positive her client was kept in her unit. We know that the facility is shuffling pods around and consolidating them. So in all of our work at Otay Mesa Detention Facility before the pandemic, we heard the rule is that we do not commingle pods. We do not commingle pods. Suddenly the pandemic hit and the pods were being commingled because the staff know that it's dangerous to mix the pods, but now they're mixing them. Masks were not available to detainees until up about 3 or 4 weeks ago, despite what the facility was reporting. There's still no hand sanitizer. We hear of people moving sick people of the facility, moving sick people out of the pod, out of their pods, and moving people who aren't sick or symptomatic into those pods without cleaning them. And what we've heard consistently from almost every detainee who's called is a complaint about the meals that they have been served during the pandemic. So early in the pandemic, the kitchen was shut down and the meals that were served changed. And the detainees were getting 3 bagged lunches every day for about 2.5 months. And this, as you can imagine, exacerbated health issues for people who had severe anemia and anyone with health issues was not being catered to. What also persists is that people who have existing health issues or have health issues that have exacerbated are not being treated. So for example, we've heard of people with infections or painful dental issues being told that the medical unit can't treat them because of COVID-19. They're being given ibuprofen and Tylenol, and anything that is more serious isn't being treated. We also get calls every day from people who fear being exposed to COVID-19, becoming sick, and potentially dying in the facility away from their families. And if the isolation, as I mentioned, if the isolation wasn't worse before, it's extremely bad now. Other detainees have told us that they are being told that they've tested positive without having gotten a test. And we suspect that that might be to avoid having to test people because then ICE has to report those statistics. What this means is that some pods continue to be on lockdown as a result of the virus, and those people in those pods can't leave their cells, they can't go to court, they can't go to legal visits, their phone access is curtailed. A lockdown in some pods are locked down for the majority of the day, can only access the phone during certain hours. We also know that Otay Mesa is transferring people out of their facilities, and that there's new people coming in as well, so that's furthering the spread. And it's unclear about whether the detainees have access to legal resources like law libraries, but their cases are now continuing in a non-detained court in downtown San Diego, and they're appearing telephonically. So they're not necessarily being able to prepare for their case or try to find legal representation because of all of the barriers that have been put in place since COVID-19 spread. In terms of court, as you mentioned, it's the San Diego Downtown Immigration Court is hearing the cases of Otay Mesa Immigration Court, which is the court inside the detention facility that was shut down at the end of March. And there's a standing order for telephonic representation for these cases, which has its advantages in that attorneys who are remote can appear and represent people by phone. It's easier, but it also has its disadvantages. It's led to a mess. Many of the court files are not made available to the judges that are hearing the cases, and the judges have been switched around. There's only one Otay Mesa Immigration Court judge who is hearing cases at the downtown San Diego court. Yet the cases are continuing with different judges. So what we're doing at IJP is we are encouraging and emphasizing release work, which is why we are soliciting the support of volunteer attorneys. Many of the people that you saw in the video at the beginning of my presentation were people who were released with the help and support of volunteer attorneys who had no experience doing this work prior to taking their first case. Since the outbreak, we've been able to place over 40 cases for representation on parole and bond, leading to dozens of releases, well, about a dozen releases. And what it means for the people who are detained is that they feel as though their pleas for support and for help, and really their pleas from what they feel might be their death threats are being heard. A little bit about bond and parole. Generally speaking, you are eligible for parole if you are classified as an arriving alien. So you've presented at the port of entry for, and it's at ICE's discretion to release you. And you have to show that you're not a flight risk and that you're not a danger to the community. All of our parole work can be done remotely by collecting sponsor documents and petitioning to ICE by mail and by email. The time commitment for a parole case is about 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 hours, depending on the client per week over a course of a month. Bond is another mechanism for release that involves appearing before a judge and having a short hearing. And individuals are eligible for bond if they were apprehended in the interior of the United States and don't have a prior removal order and don't have certain criminal convictions. The judge makes the determination. And again, this work can be done entirely remotely. Now, because of COVID-19, there is a standing order for telephonic representation, which means that the attorney can prepare over the phone with the client and appear over the phone before the judge. And we've seen several clients be released during the COVID-19 pandemic as a result of a bond being granted. There's links on how to volunteer in the chat. And so you can sign up to volunteer if that's something that you're interested in. Parole and bond can make a huge difference in someone's case. Like I mentioned, it can alleviate the fear of contracting COVID. It also allows for a connection to family in the outside world. Many people rely on WhatsApp to communicate with their family back home, and they lose that connection when they enter detention. It allows them to gather evidence for their case, for their underlying case. So they now have access to email, to internet, to phones, and they're able to also become a breadwinner again. They're able to apply for their work permits, and their sense of dignity is restored. And so while bond and parole might not mean a significant time contribution of a volunteer attorney means it makes a huge difference to a person's life. One thing that I'll mention is that the reason why immigrants need representation, it would seem obvious, but it's good to note that immigrants who are represented in a bond hearing are 4 times more likely to be released from detention than if they were pro se, and 5 times more likely to obtain immigration relief, such as asylum, if they were represented while they were detained. For a lot of the detained population, the conditions of ICE detention are triggering and resemble the trauma that they fled in their home country. One asylum seeker from Cameroon who I spoke to said that the several weeks that he endured in ICE detention were far worse than the several weeks that he endured experiencing brutal beatings in Cameroon. And it's worse because it's such an unfamiliar place. And now it's become even more scary and traumatizing and harmful because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of the benefits of volunteering with the ABA IJP is that we offer malpractice insurance, we offer mentoring through the Immigration Justice Campaign. So really an attorney who has no experience in this area can get familiar and get up to speed very quickly. We also offer ongoing training. As I mentioned, there are opportunities for remote volunteering. Despite what the government might say, immigration detention is civil detention. It really shouldn't be a death sentence. And right now, that is what the people in detention at our facility at Otay Mesa fear, is that this may be their last couple months living. And I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much, Ambreen. As you can see, with the severe conditions at the Otay Mesa Detention Center with a large COVID outbreak, there are many people who need your help. We especially can use help from individuals who might speak a second language, but even if you are monolingual English speaking and enthusiastic, we will find a way to accommodate you and very much appreciate you considering. I will now turn it over to Priscilla.
Hi, so my name is Priscilla Orta. I'm a senior staff attorney here, and I'm actually currently in Brownsville, Texas, though our office is in Harlingen. So I'm really kind of we're going to compare and contrast a little bit between Texas and California. So ProBAR is located in Harlingen, Texas, as I said before. We have a team of about 20 people, which includes about 6 attorneys, and the rest are support staff who are representing approximately, this is a really hard thing to approximate. So El Valle Detention Center serves about 1,000, maybe 1,100. PIDC, which is Port Isabel Detention Center, serves about 1,500. And then we also represent people in MPP. So we have this ragtag team of people, a very small group, very passionate group, and we are doing our best to get everyone out. We had our first case, I'm going to start in March. In March, we went on work from home. We have not been in the detention centers since March. When we started working from home in March, we actually got prank calls. And I kid you not, we got prank calls from the detainees, and they'd be like, haha, we're calling, do you have toilet paper? They would joke. And I was thrilled because that meant that this wasn't real to them yet. That meant somehow we had been spared. On May 26th, we had our first reported case. Yesterday, there were 22 reported confirmed cases. At El Valle, and those are from Port Isabel, El Valle has no confirmed cases, but many of our participants, as I prefer to call them, they have reported at least 2 people and at least 10 people are being monitored. The calls are no longer funny. They're scared. And they should be. The conditions inside the detention centers are deplorable. There's lack of communication with the outside world. And we're fighting in a jurisdiction that is not immigrant friendly. We are often, as attorneys, we feel alone fighting this fight on the border. Words don't adequately describe what it is like for them. So, what can you do about it? Well, you can volunteer, right? We just talked about that. But I want to break it down into 4 groups because I'm very much the kind of person who listens to these things and is like, okay, that's nice. You want me to do what? How am I going to do that? No worries. I got this for you. I'm looking for 4 types of people. Okay. First, I need my people who are not going to take no for an answer. Those of you who are tenacious and are dogged and are going to find and make it happen, I need you. And here's why I need you. I need you to go in and do these parole requests. I need you to go in and I need you to make the DOs answer the phone call because they won't. I need you to go into the courtrooms with your phone if you need to. If you need to do it by telephonic, it's fine. And I need you to present the cases for them. I need you to help people get out and I need you not to take no. And when they say no, because they may, they probably will, I need you to be able and willing to go and do a habeas case for us. We need help. These are people's lives. Please, if you're the kind of person who is ready to fight and you're not going to take no for an answer, don't worry that you don't know what you're doing. Don't worry about it. Frankly, I've been doing immigration work since I graduated from law school, and it's been almost a decade, and I honestly can't say that every single day is something new. So you'll be fine. Okay. So group 1, we need you to help get people out. Group 2. Actually, let me go back to group 1. I'm sorry. I got kind of emotional talking about what they face. So if you won't take no, I need you because the same pressures and the same evils that our country is facing outside of detention center are being presented inside. So there is the case, all names have been changed, of Chad. Chad is from Cameroon. He has family in the United States that are legal permanent residents, make far above the typical 125% required for our DOs and our judges down here. You have to make 125% above the poverty line. They do. They have written innumerable letters describing how they will support him financially, emotionally during all of this. He has such a perfect record that it's the kind of thing that we expect a yes. And he has been denied 3 times. We have others who have no sponsor and have been let out. We have others who have been deported before and are let out. And to be perfectly frank with you, the only thing that we can see that is different is that those folks are from Spanish-speaking countries, and Chad is not. Everyday life, fighting for what is right. Okay, so who's up now? My writers. If you're the kind of person who can create a story and you can track it and can follow it and can present it and can write it, and you like doing that, I need you to help us with appeals, because if we can't get them out on bond, we have to win the case. That's the only other way to get out. And we're going to need your help. So if you're a writer, we need you. A lot of these folks go into their hearings and they are unrepresented because, again, there's only a few of us. We cannot possibly serve everyone. And what we need is, after they lose, someone to take the case and write up the appeal, because the things that we are seeing are egregious. One example is Eddie. Eddie is from Central America. He has identified as gay his entire life, even as a young child. He was beaten, raped, abused in multiple and terrifying ways. He reaches the United States, he goes to court, and the judge writes that part of the reason that he isn't granting it is because he doesn't seem very effeminate. And apparently, if you aren't effeminate, you can't possibly be gay. These are the arguments that we are having to combat, that judges are willing to speak and say, because no one's there to stop them. Please, please. We have assistance and support. We can help you, but we need people, writers, to take these BIA cases. What else do we need? I need my people who hate bullies. I consider myself in this group. I can't stand a bully. I can't stand it. I will stop the entire thing. I'll do everything, stop whatever I'm doing, and I will turn around and I will stop it. And those of you who have that same instinct, who cannot stand to see people be beaten, abused, hurt, mentally harmed, I need you. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to say 2 words. I object. I need you to go into that courtroom by phone, however we need to do it. And I need you to help represent people in their cases. So I'm going to give the case of Cindy. Cindy is the first person in her family to speak Spanish. And she was so proud of that. That is the first thing she told me after her name. I am Cindy and I speak Spanish and I'm the first one. I taught myself. I can do this. She's an Indigenous woman who has been exposed all of her life to nothing but rape, abuse, demands based upon being an Indigenous woman, period. And she'll tell you herself. When she goes into that courtroom, one of a few things can happen. She'll be alone, and the TA can completely take whatever story she says, manipulate the words, and turn them against her. Or even worse, sometimes whenever a woman goes and claims domestic violence or rape, the judges and TAs will agree that it's simply too difficult to listen to what she has to say and that they will not take testimony. Or they will ask the women to skip over the more gruesome parts of their story for their convenience, for the judge's convenience, because it's just too difficult to listen to. I need people who are willing to say 2 words. I object. That's all you really have to say, guys, because we don't have evidence rules in immigration. So even pausing the court is worth it. We can show you how to do the rest, but we need the defenders, the people who hate bullies. And I need you to come down here and help people like Cindy. And finally, I need my researchers. I need the people who stay up and love to read articles and love to see the latest in sociological and psychological and country conditions. And I need you to help me present to judges the actual understanding of what is happening in home countries. Why? It is now well acknowledged, and you can Google this, that the Trump administration has in fact changed the nature and content of our State Department reports. Those State Department reports are effectively the only things many TAs and judges are willing to admit are the truth. If it is in that report, then I guess it's true. And if it's true, then it helps most of our clients. But here's the problem. As you may have noticed in the latest editions, whole sections about women's rights, Indigenous rights, minority rights have simply been erased. They haven't been changed. They simply don't exist anymore. And I think it's a very powerful image that the government is erasing entire sections of humanity from their own human rights reports. So you researchers, I don't have time to read this all day. I just don't. I need your help to compile and put together accurate conditions of home countries. And I can give you a list of them. We have typical countries that we see and that we work with. I also need you, if you are an expert in a particular country, please write a report about those conditions that we can share, that we can use. We desperately need researchers. And I want, before I close out, I really, really, really want to emphasize how important it is, this dignity aspect. I practice on the border, the Texas border, with or without representation. It's about 10% grant. It's simply how it is. They actually call us like asylum-free zones, where the places where it is it's very difficult to actually win at the trial level. But that's not the point. The point is that due process either exists or it doesn't. The point is that people either matter or they don't. If we can't win, we can at least say 2 things. One, I'm not going to stand here and let you just shove people aside as though they don't matter. I'm not going to let them stand here alone and be talked down to and re-traumatized and treated as though they don't matter. I'm not going to do it. And the second thing we're going to say is, you, who I represented, you mattered. I will remember your name, I will remember your voice, and I will not ever let anyone say that you didn't count. Because at its core, that is what this is about. So I'm happy to answer questions, but that was about all I had to say. Come help us. We're fun. I promise. Normally I don't cry this much, but we're a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. As you can see, this work is very impactful, both for the people that you accompany along their journey and for you yourself. And so we ask you to please join us. And one thing that I did want to mention for folks who might not be Spanish or other language speakers, we do have interpreters we work with who can help you. And I've also seen a couple of questions about how non-lawyers can help. And so we will certainly talk about that at the end of the presentations. And so now it's time for Chloe. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you so much to Ambreen and Priscilla. I'm going to share my screen right quick. And I'm going to spend the next 15 or so minutes focused on children facing deportation and the work that the ABA projects are doing in this area and how you can engage. I think one of the nice things that you can see about visually on this webinar, having the sister projects, these 3 projects at the ABA, is you'll see the intersections of all the work we do and really the impact that immigration policy has on so many different immigrant populations. And so I want to start my presentation centering our conversation on children facing deportation. So this is a picture of Teofilo Chavez. He was profiled by the Marshall Project. And we don't have time to watch the entire video on our presentation today, but I have got the link on the slides, which are being shared. And I would encourage you to take some time to watch his story, as well as the stories of the other individuals they've profiled there. Because as you have heard from Ambreen and Priscilla, the stories are very powerful. And we're talking about humans, we're talking about children, we're talking about adults from all walks of life. So Teofilo is from Honduras. He is Garifuna, which is the 3rd largest minority or indigenous community in Honduras. And his mom died when he was 2 years old. And after being cared for by his grandmother, she also passed away. So he was being cared for by his older brothers. And when he was about 14-year-old, he couldn't go to school anymore in Honduras. And there's lots of different reasons. Every story is different, but there is also a huge, around the age of 14 is oftentimes when gangs start to enter schools. They start threatening families, children, asking them to join or become, gang girlfriends and things like that. So this is why we'll often see older teenagers, 14 to 17, making that trek like Teofilo did up to the United States, seeking refuge from their home countries and also, seeking to connect with family members here in the United States. And I just want to mention, if you watch the video, there's a happy ending. I think in this field, oftentimes there are so many barriers, there's so many struggles, and oftentimes it takes a really long time to get to the end of a case to feel successful. But watching this video because it's a reminder of what happens at the case. Teofilo was able to enroll in school, living with his aunt and uncle, connect with other young Honduran teenagers who were from Honduras, spoke Garifuna. He graduated, his videos in English. He got a scholarship to play soccer in college. So again, just kind of a good reminder that this work is hard, but it has real tangible results for folks. And Teofilo, like many children facing deportation, is eligible for one of 2 forms of humanitarian relief, asylum and special immigrant juvenile status. So those are often the forms of relief that children facing deportation are seeking. So just briefly, there are certain protections that exist for children who cross the border alone without a parent or a caregiver. And one of them is that, while they are still subject to the same apprehension process, they go through the holding facility. You've probably read, especially in the last year, about the horrible conditions there. But one protection they get is that they are supposed to be removed and often are removed from those facilities within 72 hours. And they go through this federal custody system, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, in the Rio Grande Valley, down where ProBAR is, in California, everywhere. But the real purpose of those ORR facilities is to connect children to a sponsor so they can be released somewhere in the United States to live with a parent, a family member, a friend, a caring adult that can help them navigate the immigration process. And that's a process that doesn't involve going to court. It's something that the ORR agency works on themselves to release the children. They don't have to ask a judge to be released. And then the huge majority of children are released to a sponsor somewhere in the United States. There's a program for children who don't have a sponsor to be released to, long-term foster care. Sometimes children are, as they approach their 18th birthday while they're in ORR custody, are unfortunately sometimes transferred directly to ICE detention. So the facilities that Priscilla and Embreen were talking about. There's a lawsuit currently regarding that issue. And at that point, you know, they would have to go through the same process to get released from detention that that Embreen and Priscilla mentioned. And it's also at this point when they go to ORR that they might be separated from a parent, like you've probably read about a lot in the past year. But oftentimes they might be released from another adult caregiver. So from a sibling, an adult sibling, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle who has been caring for them for their whole lives. So even though they might be technically designated an unaccompanied child, they might have been separated from someone who really was caring for them. And so I just want to talk briefly about how COVID-19 has impacted children facing deportation. For the most part, as Ambreen and Priscilla mentioned, the immigration court and USCIS offices have been completely shut down to the public. Sorry, this is not in detained cases, so not as Ambreen and Priscilla mentioned. But for the most part, immigration court and USCIS offices have been completely shut down to the public. So that means that children who are applying for asylum are at a standstill because they can't go into their interviews. Or if they're, have an asylum hearing at court, it can't move forward. And even though USCIS might still be reviewing some sort of petitions that don't require a state courts have been hugely impacted, as I'm sure many practitioners around the country have seen and felt. They're closed or prioritizing certain cases. And so that can, add some additional barriers to a child seeking special immigrant juvenile status because it requires going to state court. That adds to the stress. It adds to the timelines of youth who have this continued uncertainty about their legal status. But then on the other hand, courts have remained open in some instances. One instance is, I think a helpful instance in the adult detention context so that folks can get out. But we've also seen that children who are detained in those ORR facilities are also continuing to go to court, and they're moving forward at an atypically fast pace. So there's been this recent push to finalize children's cases who are in ORR within 60 days, which, if you think about that timeline I just mentioned, it really doesn't make any sense for this population because the large majority of them are going to be released to a family or sponsor somewhere in different parts of the United States. They should be pursuing their immigration case in the court, wherever that is. There's no court intervention needed for them to be released. As I mentioned, that's a process that just happens through ORR. And forcing children to go to court for, no real, to push their cases forward for no real reason it's a complete change in practice. And the fact that it coincides with COVID, I just think kind of makes it even more difficult for children and folks who are trying to represent them. They've been in the United States for not very long. They're still trying to establish safety and trust with adults. They haven't reached their caregivers yet. So that has been definitely a negative sort of not direct impact from COVID, but a sort of a strange policy happening amongst COVID. And then I would say perhaps most devastatingly of all, DHS has essentially shut down the border to all migrants. asylum seekers, including unaccompanied children, under this provision of old law that allows the restriction of persons or property from designated places because of communicable disease, right? So COVID is the justification for shutting down the border, which also means, shutting out folks who are fleeing for their lives and children. There's no exception to this for unaccompanied children. The ACLU, the CGRS, a number of organizations actually just filed a lawsuit this week contesting the border closure. Oh, there's my little pop-up. So I'll need to update my slides. Literally, immigration policy changes day to day. So if you do your slides 3 days in advance, there's inevitably going to be some updates. So I'll share these with Ali. But that is GYJPV Wolf, and you can link to the case there. But as they report, nearly 1,000 unaccompanied children in March and April were turned back at the border, including returning some children back to Mexico in the middle of the night. And that's just the children's number, let alone everyone else who might be seeking asylum at the border. The numbers are typically much higher than that. So there's just a very few number of children who are actually making it into the ORR system right now. And then last, the government's severely limited immigration for individuals who are outside of the United States as well, and who might be able to immigrate here through certain visa petitions. And that typically doesn't affect the thousands of children facing deportation or others who are already here in the United States. But it's, again, just indicative of this widespread attack and restrictions on all types of immigration that are authorized under US law, and are COVID is really the justification that's being used to put forth many of these barriers. I'm going to kind of breeze through this slide, but it's the number of apprehensions at the southwest border for the past few years, and you can just see that massive drop, the navy blue line, as compared to those top two lines, that kind of mustard color line and the blue line, which are last year, 2019 and 2014, when we've had major surges. And then I also just wanted to briefly share, again, this is breaking news. I think this happened yesterday, maybe today. Again, there's just a lot of attacks on asylum that are happening, and some asylum regulations were issued yesterday. And I just want to bring it to your attention. Again, the notice will be linked in the slides so that you can, be looking out for the rule to be published in the Federal Register beginning on June 15th. And I know there's a lot of stakeholders that are going to be out there that'll give sample comments and ideas on how to push back, because the purpose of these new asylum regulations is really to continue limiting all forms, just to continue limiting the law as it exists and making it incredibly difficult for folks to seek asylum, children or adults, in a system that's, quite frankly, really hard and complicated to navigate. So again, that's just kind of an FYI, keep your eyes open. That will be a way to engage and advocate against those regulations going into place. So the good news is that there are lots of ways to support children facing deportation in your own communities across the United States. I want you to encourage to take the time now, especially while there is remote work available, to work with ProBAR and IJP on the border as those opportunities exist, because as they said, that's crucial and critical. And after you do that, and perhaps in the future, you can also definitely connect with a child or an organization that's in your own community throughout the United States to them in their immigration proceedings. So this is a heat map of US counties where individuals with pending immigration court reside. It's not specific to juveniles, but you'll see there's a large, there's going to be a large overlap between the two populations. So, hopefully you can look at this map, see your county listed, and know that there is someone who needs your help in your county. I looked at TRAC, which is the organization that publishes this map yesterday. And there were 600,000 pending cases for juveniles alone, and only 306,000 of them had representation. So that's, somewhere close to 50%. So there are lots of people out there in your community who need your help navigating through the immigration system. And there are lots of organizations out there, in addition to the ABA projects, that are working with children facing deportation, because children are not appointed free legal counsel or best interest advocates like children in the juvenile or child welfare systems. So children, whether they're age 2, 3, 4, 16, 17, are expected to appear in immigration court alone. And so while there are tons of organizations, you might see an organization on the slide that's in your community, there are still not enough representatives for all children who are in the system. And even areas like Houston, where CILA is, Dallas, Charlotte, big cities, they oftentimes still have high numbers of unrepresented children, just because, again, the numbers are so high. And as I mentioned before, children are leaving detention, being connected to different communities. So there might be a high volume of children or families in, a big city that still need representation. So we at CILA refer to the people doing this work as UC champions, so advocates who guide children through complex legal procedures with courage, competency, compassion, and creativity. And I think Priscilla did an amazing job of exemplifying, those kinds of qualities that, we envision folks doing this work who have. She's right. We need a little bit of everybody. And there are organizations who you can work with, like ABA, like IJP, and ProBAR, who have the ability, and correct me if I'm wrong in mixed speaking, but to mentor. There are also children that might be in an area of the country without an organization to mentor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how CILA can provide some resources as well for folks who might not be able to work directly with an organization while working on a case. So what is CILA? Where do we come in? As you know, we're a project of the Commission on Immigration with my lovely colleagues here on the call. We are a legal resource center. So we are a capacity building organization. We do not work directly with children or with families who are going through the immigration system. Our role is to train and provide resources to the folks who are out there doing the work. And we we opened our doors, like I said, here in Houston, Texas, in late 2015 in response to the thousands of children from Central America who surged across the southern border. And the numbers haven't gone down. We know there's a huge will, like the huge number of people that are on this webinar, to help. And so we really see our role as supporting the folks, whether they work at a nonprofit or whether they're a pro bono attorney, to do the work and be on the ground representing children. So for those of you who are across the United States, we offer trainings, webinar trainings, and tons of resources on our website. And we also have the Pro Bono Matters for Children Facing Deportation platform, which I'm going to talk about in just a second in more detail. For those of you who might be joining us from Texas, we do offer individualized technical assistance and collaboration through working groups and some more Texas-specific training, especially around special immigrant juvenile status, which is, may vary state by state. We're a small organization. We are 6 people strong, and here we are. We do have a pretty deep knowledge base and diverse backgrounds that we all bring to this space in child advocacy, removal defense, immigration, family, and administrative law. So we hope that we can offer, kind of a depth of perspective in our training. And what I really want to kind of close out here with, and either Ali or Ginny just cut me off if I'm going too long. But what I really want to talk about today is pro bono matters for children facing deportation. So one way that pro bono attorneys can tap into supporting the work of legal service nonprofits around the country is either by matching yourself or a colleague with an opportunity on our platform. And this CILA runs this platform. It's a national platform funded by the Vera Institute of Justice, and it's a vehicle for nonprofit legal service providers who work with youth who are either detained by or but are more often released into the community, as you saw on that map, to identify ways in which pro bono attorneys can support the youth. So in turn, lawyers and advocates can search and share available pro bono cases and opportunities. So that's where you step in. And the needs of the youth may change. This is a national portal with with organizations from all posting cases. So it might be, full representation of a child. It might be a research project. It might be, help with one piece of a case. There's lots of different options, and you can browse through it and find an option that's either in your area or remote. And so if you do want to check out the platform, this is the webpage to get to it, which I know will be in your materials as well. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through what it looks like. So this is our Pro Bono Matters for Children Facing Deportation portal. And one of the handouts that you is an information sheet that goes into more detail about the need that I've been talking about a little bit. But if you scroll down on our website, you'll see a catalog of pro bono opportunities. So I've just put a couple of examples up here on the slide. They change daily as the needs of the different organizations and children facing deportation change. So here are just two examples. One of them is actually from ProBAR. ProBAR works with many children who are detained along the Rio Grande Valley on their children's program side. And then as children are released around the country, they work super hard to try and connect them with an attorney wherever the child is. And sometimes, there either might not be a nonprofit there, or that nonprofit might be maxed out already. So for example, if you live in North Carolina and you want to connect with ProBAR so that they can give you a referral for a case of a child placed in North Carolina, you could click interested on this case. There's also cases like this in Miami where they're specifically in need of an attorney to represent a child in a special immigrant juvenile visa. So the opportunities are different. And we have 17 opportunities in the catalog right now. So it would be amazing if 17 of the folks on this call, when you got off the computer or multitask and do it while I'm talking, either click interested or share with a friend. And if you do that, or you're planning on doing that, just send us a note in the chat and encourage your friends. And first take a remote case from Priscilla or Ambreen, and then come sign up over here. So you can just click interested and put in your contact information. It's really helpful if you put your bar number if you are an attorney, and if you're not, you can just put in the comment box a little bit about yourself. If you don't find a case that matches you, or you are busy taking a case from IJP or ProBAR, you can share this card with somebody else. So maybe you don't live in North Carolina, but you know someone who does. You can shoot them a quick email by sharing the link to the case card. And then of course, I just wanted to highlight CILA's resources. So on our same webpage, we have links to many of the resources that we have available for pro bono attorneys who are new to this field or just need a refresher. For example, we have a whole webinar series on working with children facing deportation, and this is that first webinar in that series. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my voice. So that was my recorded voice, but the ABA, as always, is a leader in this field. So they have a whole practice on the standards of custody care and representing of unaccompanied children. And last, if you just kind of want to get on our listserv so that you can find out about opportunities and resources later on, this is the link to join up for our newsletter. And then for those of you who might just have some summer reading, these are some great books you can read while you're at the beach, or if you have to stay at home, that are all centered around the experience of different immigrant populations. So there's something for everyone there. And I really do hope that you will take the opportunity to sign up in any of these ways. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much to all three of you for your really helpful and impactful presentations. We've gotten a few questions that I want to turn to in a second, but I did want to add some information that also some folks have asked. In terms of malpractice insurance, if you sign up for a case with ProBAR or IJP, then you are covered by the malpractice insurance that ProBAR and IJP carry. Also, and I believe Ambreen mentioned this in her presentation, but a lot of people might feel like, oh, I've heard immigration law is complicated. I've never done it before. I really want to help, but I'm afraid that I'll mess up or I won't know what I'm doing. Well, we have a wonderful relationship with the Immigration Justice Campaign, which is part of the American Immigration Council, and they we can set you up with a mentor through the Immigration Justice Campaign to help you along with the process of a release request, whether it's parole or bond, and they have office hours where they can answer questions. And so you'll be helped along the way. We have samples that you can work from. So we really want to make it as accessible as possible, in addition to having the interpreters available. I also wanted to mention that some of you have asked about how you can sign up or if we can contact you. It would be most helpful to us if you could fill out the forms for ProBAR and IJP, and then go to the CILA website to express your interest in pro bono matters in the way that Chloe mentioned. It might be hard for us to individually reach out to everybody who's sending us emails. So if you send those surveys, that would be most helpful. I put them in the chat box. They also are on the webpage for the webinar, which Ali has put in the chat box a couple of times, but we can do that again before the end. And then also you will be receiving a follow-up email after the conclusion of the webinar that will also include links to these forms. So we want to make sure to capture your interest. As you can see from today, we have COVID-19 emergencies in a couple detention centers, and we would love if some of you would be willing to offer your time to assist in release requests for people currently in detention in Texas or California. And so the most popular question we've gotten is what people most want to know is, if they're not a lawyer, a licensed attorney, how can they help? So maybe Priscilla, if you can start, and then Ambreen or Chloe, if you want to chime in.
Okay. First, there's a lot of ways. And so I'm going to start where everything starts, local. If you are not an attorney, so I'm going to be really honest, mostly what we are calling for today are attorneys. And there's a reason, because it allows us to use our bar license and really get in there and do what we do as attorneys, which is at this point, kind of call up people and yell at them, which I enjoy, I'm just saying. So if you're not an attorney, I would first say, look locally. There are amazing organizations doing amazing things. So I lived in Chicago, and it's my soul home. It's my favorite place on earth, even the winters. Ugh. But it's my favorite place on earth. And, I have friends who are doing things like in Lacaish, where they are working with folks here in the border, presenting donations and stuff for folks who are at MPP and are still waiting their hearings. I have friends who have been doing storytelling, and they come down to the border and they have been helping. I have given them platforms and given them ideas of what it's like in immigration court, and they help people learn to tell their stories so they can represent themselves, because that's the sad reality, but also help them process their trauma. I am not a psychologist. I should be no one's psychologist. I am not in any way qualified to handle that. They are, and that's what they do. The second step, when we talk about research and writing, The projects won't necessarily be every day, every week, but it is definitely worth contacting programs or contacting organizations that do provide research, such as CGRS, local universities. That could work. If you have a group of people who would like to come and do a particular project, that would work. If in doubt, email Emily Joyner, whose email I have put everywhere, and I already am gonna write her an email to beg her forgiveness, but you can contact Emily and she can work with you to figure out where you can fit in what we're doing. So here's an example. Mount Sinai has this program where certified mental health experts and their students can talk with our folks on the phone to give them mental health evals. We desperately need that. We desperately need doctors who can write us letters saying, hey, by the way, COVID, scary disease. Can you let this person out? I mean, legitimately, they'll say, well, what's the big deal? He's just got diabetes. He's fine. And we're like, but we're not doctors. So what am I going to say? The news told me it was bad. It doesn't work. And if you're just angry and you want to make sure everyone knows how angry you are, call your officials. Call them right now, because none of this would be happening if Congress stepped in. None of this would be happening if we had let me rephrase that. Most of this wouldn't be happening if we had a different president, I'm guessing. Politics this is the direct result of an election. Everything we're discussing is the direct result of an election. So call them. This is a time when there are peaceful protests. This is a time when people are speaking up. Don't just sit there, say something. And I know it seems futile to call your congressman, especially if they're not open to hearing this, but that's the point. You're speaking for people who no one else is speaking for. So don't be afraid to call someone who just doesn't feel like listening to you, because you have more power in that phone call than all of my detainees do, period.
Ambreen or Chloe, do either of you guys want to add anything?
Sure. So I'll just add a couple of points. I want to emphasize that Priscilla's right in that the people who have bar licenses are people who we can put most immediately into action. That said, like I mentioned, there are a number of different languages that we encounter at the detention center, and we do have interpreters for Spanish and some for French. They're all volunteers that we rely on, but for languages that are maybe less common, Creole, Pular, Arabic, Russian, those are languages that we'd love to have somebody who would interpret, and that could really facilitate that client's representation. You don't have to have qualifications to interpret. You simply have to be fluent in the language and be able to translate. The other thing that Priscilla kind of touched on is fundraising. There are bond funds that right now are really being relied on quite a bit and don't have the resources. We're seeing in Otay Mesa very high ICE bonds being set. So those are amounts that that deportation officers that ICE sets for people in detention to be released on as part of their deterrent for them to be a flight risk. And those, I mean, and they're pretty arbitrary, quite honestly, but they're being set very high. And it doesn't make sense because we're seeing higher amounts during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't know why that is. But either way, these sponsors who the people in detention are relying on to house them and to acquaint them with the area that they're living in, they don't necessarily have jobs that can pay for these amounts. And so fundraising for bond funds or fundraising to pay a certain client's bond, et cetera, you get that money back at the end of a case if the person appears for all their hearings. So that's one way, and then you can donate it wherever you want or to that client. But that's one way to participate. We do, as Priscilla mentioned, we do like to have legal researchers available. And so if you are a law student, we have 6 law interns right now. You can feel free to send your resume to me. We're always looking for interns as well, and just general legal researchers. And then health professionals, yes, as Priscilla mentioned, it's the same thing at Otay Mesa, we have people who have cardiac issues, who we need someone to describe, we need a cardiologist to describe what the intersection is if they were to contract COVID-19 or have contracted it and maybe are, in a certain position. We'd need doctors and even mental health professionals to be able to write declarations and supporting documents for the petitions. And then finally, if you're not an attorney, if you're a paralegal, because I did see a number of people who are paralegals, you can assist in document collection with sponsors. And we can, if there's an attorney who wants help communicating with a sponsor or doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, a paralegal or someone else can facilitate that communication. So feel free to send me an email or fill out our screener with IJP. I put down what type of person you are. If you're a law student, if you're a paralegal, that's all listed. So you can list that in your answers.
Thank you. Chloe, do you have any other thoughts?
I'll chime in to say that sometimes on Pro Bono Matters, either CILA or other folks will post research opportunities. So that's a way people can get tapped in. And then, just reach out to your local communities. There's a lot of faith communities that are really organized around immigration advocacy. So if you're a member of a faith community, you might look there, or just to your local community, because there's a lot of folks organizing around supporting immigrants right now.
Thank you. Another question we've gotten.
Wait. Can I add one thing?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Okay. So really big thing. If you live in an area, so I was an immigration attorney in Kansas. I was the only nonprofit immigration attorney in the entire state at one point. So a lot of people will have no access and inability to pay. And even if they could pay, there aren't many private practitioners anymore. And I'm really glad that Anne Breen brought that point. Many people are taking this time to retire because this work is hard. So what can you do? You're not an attorney. You're living in a very rural area or an area without resources. There are wonderful webinars, particularly one by NIPNLG/SPLC/ I think like a bunch of other people did how to do pro se humanitarian parole requests in the time of COVID. We, of course, can help people by representing them, but there's plenty of places in the country that could be exactly where you are right now, where people need anyone to write English and speak English and help them put a packet together. And there are trainings for that online by reputable organizations.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. And I also want to emphasize something Priscilla said, which is that, one of the reasons we really want people to get involved, in addition, of course, to the direct impact it has on clients' lives, is that it exposes you to issues that you might not have known about before. And just by exposing yourself to them and becoming a messenger about them and for them and educating other people about what's going on, that is powerful, because the more people who are aware of what's happening and are concerned about it and who are expressing their concern, that is power. And so just by participating today and learning and telling people about what you've learned, you're doing something. And so we appreciate that. Another thing that people have asked is, so you say I can do this remotely. How do I talk to my client? And if I do bond, let's say I have an EOIR number, but I haven't used it in a few years. How am I supposed to represent the person in court if everything is remote? So maybe Priscilla and Anne Breen, you could speak to how the courts that you all work with are handling and the detention centers are handling communication right now.
So right now in San Diego, it's by GoToMeeting, I think is what they're using. So it's an online, just like Zoom, it's a Zoom alternative. So that's what they're using to have attorneys participate. You can also use the phone through that as well. In terms of speaking to your client, it's definitely a challenge, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth pursuing. We are all speaking to our clients on the phone right now. We're also not going into detention. It's just too dangerous, and also it doesn't really. There's no guarantee that we'll actually see a client if we go down to the detention center, because as I mentioned during my presentation, a lot of the detention centers or a lot of the pods are cohorted and not facilitating legal visits because they're on quarantine. So yes, it's through the phone. They have phone access, and while it's not regular, it is enough to put forward a bond, an affidavit in support, a declaration in support of a bond, or to articulate what's needed to go into a parole application to an attorney who can put that together. We rely a lot more on sponsors and the information we get from sponsors than we have in the past, where we were meeting with clients in person. And so we have to ask certain questions to sponsors that maybe we would be posing to a client in the past. Because the phones are monitored, we recommend that all attorneys or anyone doing legal call specify that it's a legal call at the beginning of the call, so that privilege is preserved. But through increments of 10 minutes often, because that's what the clients can afford, we're able to put together enough to get clients released, and we have seen we've had success with that. We also have Skype interviews for volunteer attorneys. We can set that up. It's very inconsistent and it's very new, and even our in-house attorneys have had a lot of issues accessing their clients through Skype, but it is out there in terms of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, we use the phone. We are not that high tech yet. That is super cool. It's Texas. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, I will admit, because I know when I tell people this, that you have to do a final hearing by phone, they're like, due process, and this is massive. And I'm like, yeah, it is. You know what else is a due process violation? Letting somebody sit there alone and have no protection from a TA and from a judge who are frankly not on their side. So it's not easy. And down here, it's really hard. It is by phone. But we are doing it, and I know you can do it too. We'll be part of a big community of people with wonderful war stories. And one day, my goal is we fight and win ourselves out of a job. That's my goal. So, yeah.
Yeah, as Priscilla and Ambreen said, it's very I think has been practically one of the most difficult things for pro bono attorneys who've worked on release cases in the last couple of months. But it's a small window into the everyday lives of people in immigration detention who need, they can't make calls for free generally. There are free phone lines directly to ProBAR and IJP because they are legal, they are LOP providers, and so they provide free legal information. But generally for someone in immigration detention to call family or to call a private attorney costs an astronomical amount. And then they have certain times of the day where they can call and certain times where they can't. So it is frustrating, but as Priscilla and Ambreen said, it's worth persevering through in order to give that person the chance of being released, especially during these difficult times. And then one other question we've gotten, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit, is sponsors. But some people are wondering where individuals who are detained go after being released, and whether they are tested for COVID-19 before being released, and if they have access to healthcare once they're released. I know that's kind of a compound question, but any or all of those that anybody wants to weigh in on and share information, that would be helpful.
I can share about whether they're tested at Otay, Mesa, where we work. It depends. So it depends on if ICE really wants to release them in a short time frame. So if ICE wants to let somebody out, they are letting them out without testing them, despite them having symptoms, and they're not letting the sponsor know. And then we've also heard stories of people who have actually tested positive and being released, and the sponsor didn't know that the person had tested positive. Then we hear stories of people who are not being released because they are on their medical clearance hasn't cleared by ICE. And so those are people who have tested positive, and they're waiting to see what happens, and they're holding them in ICE detention until they're asymptomatic and have a clear test. They go to live with their sponsors in their various states. And I just want to mention very quickly that those people, because we're placing cases for doing release work and it's a limited scope, the people who end up being released generally right now, they don't have legal representation on their underlying asylum case in their once they're reunited with their sponsor. And so if another way to help, and IJP can mentor these cases, is to do non-detained asylum work. And so if you're an immigration practitioner, or if you're an attorney or a DOJ accredited rep and want to take on those cases, you can help somebody who's just been in detention, just experienced this super horrible thing and is ready to like forget about it and get their life, you know, start their life afresh. It's a steep learning curve to be released as well, and to have all those expectations, and to realize that you're on your own on the outside, and that those people that you were calling regularly, you can't call them anymore because they don't serve you. And so having a non-detained, having an attorney for your non-detained case can make a huge difference. In terms of medical coverage, I think it's through the sponsor. Maybe Priscilla can answer a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so it's state by state. So I have folks who get released to California, and I actually have helped connect them with various social workers and things, because I just have friends all around the country. And so I'll connect them with my friends, who'll connect them with their friends, and then they apply and they get health insurance. Chicago, again, wonderful Cook County. It also provides to all asylum applicants, they all are qualified for health insurance during the pendency of their case. Those who, but see, that's not where most of our folks go. Most of our folks are going to the Deep South. That's where the work is. That's where their families are. And I really want to emphasize something. These aren't random sponsors. This isn't a random process. They didn't just wake up one morning and were like, you know what's a good place to go to? The United States. I don't really know anything about it, but whatever, it's fun. No, no one does this like that. They have family waiting for them, for the most part. So they go to their families, and unfortunately, because our country does not have a comprehensive system of healthcare for the poor, most of them will not receive health insurance. Most of them will not receive treatment. And we've heard nothing of testing before being released.
So just a couple of things to follow up on what we've been talking about release. The sponsor is the person who sends a letter to, or includes a letter to the deportation officer or the immigration judge, and that person will be responsible for the individual who's detained for them showing up at their immigration hearings if they're released from detention, and also for showing that they make the requisite income to be able to support another person in their household. And so generally, it's very difficult to be released from ICE detention if you don't have an identified sponsor who will be receiving you. And often that person, it can depend on the court and the detention center, but generally that person needs to be a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident. Sometimes if the person has a work permit or another type of immigration status, it'll be accepted, but it can vary by judge and by detention center. And so people are not being released and no one knows where they're going, or they don't have any support mechanism. And there are sometimes people who really don't have, for people who don't have any type of support system in the United States, sometimes, again, depending on the detention officer or the judge, will release people to shelters that have agreed to accept them or something like that. But generally someone is going to a sponsor. And just if you look at, if you go on www.ice.gov/coronavirus, they update, or are supposed to daily, the number of COVID-19 cases in custody. And you'll see that of the approximately 25,000 people currently in custody, only 5,000 people have been tested. And that's cumulative. So there are people coming in and out of ICE detention, but even in the last 2 or 3 months, 5,000 people have been tested. And I believe close to 50% of them have tested positive. So by no means are the great majority of people who are being detained being tested, or everybody who might show symptoms being tested. And just, I think I mean, I'm not medically trained, but I think the rate of the positive tests and how different it is from the test positive rates in the general public leads you to think that they're focusing their testing on people who they have reason to think have the disease. So it creates a lot of implications for society, right? Not only for the safety of people who are in detention, but for the people who work there. And then those people are leaving those detention centers every day, and they're going to get groceries, they're going to visit their families. And so this is why it's, we should all be concerned about this for a lot of reasons, because we're all human beings, but also because we truly are a community. And so when we create detention conditions that can't keep people safe, we are also risking people, the larger communities around them. I believe that we are out of time. So I just wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us. We really appreciate your interest in this subject. I also want to thank Ambreen, Priscilla, and Chloe for taking their time to join us today. It's really such important work that you guys are doing, and we really appreciate you taking your time. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice is continuing to provide free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide that they hope is helpful. We also hope that you consider joining and becoming active in the American Bar Association if you aren't already. You can join the American Bar Association at americanbar.org. You can also find information on other free programs on CRSJ's webpage, which again is americanbar.org/CRSJ. Thank you everybody again for your time, and stay safe.